As I say, I sadly missed Barbara's trip to Manera Quarry in beginning of July, but luckily she's doing it again. So we'll be able to go, I'll be able to get out to Manera in June this year, because it's a lovely site. So the first one I got to was Robert's trip to Burton Marsh on July the 24th. That, didn't I? Yeah, we parked at the entrance of the marshes, and the first thing we looked at was a bramble, which Eric identified. I can't remember what it was now, but that started us off, and it's an interesting site because you've got the lanes and the hedgerows where we started off. And then we come to this long track parallel to the coast with broad verge on one side, then a sheep grazed fields, which are having quite a lot of work done to them, and a bit of low dry stone walling. And then the marshes spread off seaward to the left. And here we are, we're starting to record things. Steve ahead. Well, I'm ahead of him, actually. Well, I'm taking a photograph. We're looking at the larger things and the smaller things. So this is one of the annual grasses. This is silver hair grass, Era caryophylla. And see, it likes a fairly open habitat to grow because it's an annual. It needs somewhere for the seeds to land and then grow. There's also early hair grass, mainly at the base of the wall and then cracks on top of the wall. Earlier hair grasses are praecox meaning precocious, early. And you can see by the time of July, it's totally finished flowering, it's totally dried, and the seeds are all spread by then. And they over summer as seeds and with flowers early spring. Now on the wall, there's an interesting plant of rest harrow with quite marked spines, but it isn't spiny rest harrow. It's the spiny form of the common rest harrow, Anemones repens. And you can see the glandular hairs all over the leaves. And when it's growing in the dunes, sand gets blown about a lot, of course, and quite often you see the rest harrow totally covered in sand grains sticking to these glandular dunes. There's lots and lots of wormwood growing in this broad strip, amongst quite a few other things. There were dotted specimens of a musk thistle, which isn't that frequent in our neck of the woods, it mainly being a limestone and chalky plant rather than or mainly acidic soils. There's also quite a few clumps of Maruvium vulgare, and that again has the yellowy grey leaves and these dense whorls of small white labiate flowers, and the grey leaves sort of hanging down in the same whorls. It has a typical square stem of all this family as well, but there's good clumps of that along this route. That was good to see. There was another thistle which gave us a bit of work. It looks very much like welted thistle, but when you came to look at the details, it seems that it's slender thistle, Cardius tenuifloris. And there's a really good population of that right at the top edge of the salt marsh. As I see, it's a spiny looking thing. And hopefully we'll see lots more thistles when we get out in the summer again. Further along, we're looking out across the marshes to Flintshire in the background, and there's an interesting patch of a very spectacular plant, which you can just see in front of Eric there. It's seeding itself well, and at this stage it looks uncomfortably edible, doesn't it? It looks like a vegetable, but when it flowers, it doesn't look nearly so appetizing. It has these yellow flowers, these livid purple network of veins all over it, and it's henbane, which is not something I'd recommend putting in your tea. This is the seed pods starting to develop. Calyx, this sort of urn-shaped calyx and a smooth pod inside. And it's also doing well here because it is spread quite a way around and it is both sides of the path. Now, a natural feature of this coast is exposures of the red Runcorn sandstone. And these, I think, I should have checked. I think they're Jurassic. I think they're the ancient sand dune systems, which are now set as sandstone outcrops. So this edge of the Wirral had quite a few of these. There's red rocks right at the very end at West Kirby Hoylake, of course. And some of these have been quarried here, but there are still some natural outcrops, and they occur in nest gardens as well, and they underlie most of the Wirral. And we stopped on the side of one of these outcrops, and off to the left was a big quarry with some interesting plants growing in the quarry wall. This was our lunch spot. Then afterwards we headed off along this huge long across the more freshwater marsh, which sort of bleeds into the salt marsh off to the right. It's all drained. It's just mainly rough grazing and marshland. Quite a lot of water plants, obviously. The reddish colour is the water fern, Azolla folliculoides, the little floating fern. That will normally disappear in winter when the frosts come, and then the rest of the water is covered by minute fronds of duckweeds, the lemna species, and then the tall grasses around, the yellowish green ones, are Glyceria maxima, the reed canary grass. Then the dark green is bear reed, branched bear reed, Sparganium erectum. So you get good views of the water plants from the boardwalk. The nice one to see was the lesser water parsnip. There's Berilla erecta, there's good colonies of that, and of course there's lots of more common stuff like the roseberry, not the roseberry willow herb, the great willow herb, Epilobium hirsutum, and lots of marsh horsetail all filtering in amongst the mix as well. Robert did do a really good list from the site. There's lots of interesting plants seen and quite a range of stuff, because as you went further into the walk, we walked into Flintshire along a bit of an old railway line, so there's embankments made ground which had a different set of plants as well. Now in August we went to the Old Estuary. Steve, we met at Hightown Station and walked down, and it was high tide, because it was a good time to go, I think. On the walk down we had some little precursor of the maritime influence. Around the base of some of the street trees there was sea fern grass, Catapodium marinum. And we got down to the edge of the river itself. That is the more usual path, but that was still inundated, so we chose the slightly inland version. The sea aster still was flowering in August. If it had been a sunnier day, it's usually covered in bees, which is good to see. In amongst the reed bed we came to, it had been raining quite a lot before we arrived. It was fairly dry when we were actually there, but the raindrops had settled on these heads of black mustard. You see the seed heads, the black mustard, and there's, instead of standing sort of taller than head height, they're all bent down with the weight of the rain. So we had a good close look at the black mustard seeds. And then heading out, following the riverbank, Again, loads of sea aster in flower. And with it being high tide, the birds are more concentrated because they're not spread out all over the marsh feeding. So they have learned that this area, Olca firing range, is a safe place to congregate. So they're having a siesta above the siesta. Oh, never mind. This time of year as well, the cord grass is all flowering, the Spartina anglica. That's a late summer flowering thing, so it's a good time of year to see that. It's a very dynamic situation at Hightown and the River Olch. Sometimes there's extensive salt marsh, and sometimes the sand blows in and the waves erode the salt marsh, and it's replaced by sand. But we seem to be on a bit of a salt marsh building phase in this bit of the estuary, and see that Spartina is really spreading towards the south. But I remember when it was red fescue mainly, with Sierra grass and sea plantain, and that got eroded away. But there's erosion happening further around this shallow bay, and unfortunately it's affecting the exposures of the I think they're Holocene, are they? The deposits from the broadleaf forest, which established after the glaciation but before the sea level rises, so it became inundated. So you've got this peaty substance with lots of plant remains in it, and sometimes large areas of it covered by sand, but now it's in an erosive phase, and the wave action is gradually breaking it up and abrading it. So a lot of the strand line is bits of peaty substance from the old forest beds, but you can still see tree stumps in situ where they grew, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, and then became inundated. But then from there we went towards the foot of the dunes, so you start seeing more strand line plants as you head inland. And this is a nicely flowering Gateley Myrta, and I can't remember what the English name is. Anyway, it's that.
Sea rocket.
Sea rocket, that's right. Thank you, Steve. These strand line plants are very opportunistic. They don't have a set flowering period as such, but when the conditions are right and the seeds germinate and the plants can grow, they seed as madly as they can just to get the seeds into the system for the next generation. There's another one of that group of plants, not related. This is the prickly saltwort, Salsola Carly. So that was doing well in patches. And of course, one of our local specialities is the Isle of Man cabbage, Concia monensis, with these very divided greyish green leaves, and then the pale yellow typical crucifer flowers. So it's nice to see some of that there. There's a lot of that along the coast, especially to the south. But going further into the dunes, we've still got a plant we've known about for a long time and is still with us. It's the sea bindweed, Calistegia solanella. We didn't see any flowers at this late period, but the leaves are very distinctive. They're waxy and fleshy, which is typical of a lot of seaside plants, saving moisture. And the amount of calcium carbonate in the dunes is illustrated by having carline thistle, which you normally find on limestone or chalk. And that was still looking good this late in August as well. Strand line can throw up all sorts of things. The sunflower looking pretty good. And in one area near the boat club where there was fresh water seeping across the strand line, there was a small patch of water whirlgrass established, Cataprusa aquatica, which is known from the coast, but it's very sporadic and pretty rare on the Sefton coast. And in a sweat patch, as well as all the Bulboscurnus maritimus, the sea clubrush, was flowering. I still think it's in optimum conditions for its growth, because instead of being about waist height, it's about knee height. But there's plenty of it, and there's lots of other things all around it. There's lots of hemlock water dropwort, and the Berylla erecta, the water parsnip, west water parsnip. And there's this mystery umbellifer, which there wasn't enough evidence to find out what it was on the day. Have you found out what this was yet, Steve? Are we able to get back?
No, not sure what that one was. No.
No.
Unidentified.
Unidentified.
Try it next year.
It's a Yugo, an unidentified green object. I always like to find this little grass as well, the Parapolis strigosa, the hard grass. The seeds break off one by one and reveal these little round ends, pale ends, and that's usually the first thing you see. And once you see them, you can look for the grass underneath it, and that's a typical strandline salt marsh edge thing. As we head a bit further south, we get into the zone of demolition rubble, which has become abraded and become an artificial shingle bank, basically. So we get the rock samphire, Crypthemum maritimum, flowering away well. The odd clump of sea campion, Silene uniflora. And a very nice sea poppy. You can see it's been flowering all summer. Great long pods developing, but still a few flowers. And again, very grey foliage growing in amongst the Crypthemum and Fungus arvensis and Restaro. Lots of typical shinglebank species in an area which never had shingle before all this was dumped. So it's an artificial habitat, but seeds are being carried across, presumably from North Wales or perhaps from further north up the coast. And a lot of the seeds of these species are buoyant anyway, so they're designed to float and recolonize new areas. And that's just what they've done, which is lovely to see. We headed back through more typical dune habitat, so it's a very diverse trip out down to the Old Estuary. Steve led us past all sorts of the good things. We saw the typical stuff like the polypodies and the harebells, a few harebells still hanging on mid-August. There's a young growth of oak, which we think is probably hybrid between and the Petrea, but it had especially large numbers of galls on the leaves. These are silk button galls and these are spangle galls, but you can see from the yellow blotches on the leaves in the background there what the galls look like on the other side. There's thousands and thousands of galls on these scrubby bit of oak growth, so that's supporting a lot of life. It's an umbellifer we can recognise in the dunes here. Again, it's not widespread in the Sefton dunes, but it's in the Hightown dunes. That's Burnet saxifrage, which confusingly, Daniel, is neither a burnet nor a saxifrage. It's an umbellifer. It's Pimpinella saxifraga. And of course, also in this section of dunes, which are quite old surviving dunes, there's some common Gromwell, the Lithospermum. Lithospermum, lithos means stone, spermum is seeds. And once the seeds are ripe, they're white and shiny, like they've been glazed in white glaze, and as hard as anything. So they're little stony seeds, and it's very deeply furrowed leaves. Has white flowers early in the year. We're also looking at the crow garlic. Most of it was tall heads with clusters of bulbils. There were some with half and half, or mainly bulbils and a tuft of flowers coming through, and just one or two which had a full head of flowers, which is, I think, slightly less usual for the crow garlic. The next trip we went on was September this time. We met by Liso Lighthouse. This was led by John Crowder. It led us into a bit of meadowland where there's the red bartia still had some straggly flowers. The name of this plant always confused me. It's Odontites verna. Verna usually implies spring, but here we are in September and it's still flowering. In fact, it doesn't usually start flowering until in July, August. But that was in amongst the meadow, and there's some hairy tear amongst it as well. There's field geranium, field meadow cranesbill. That had been flowering all year, lots of seed pods, but there's still some flowers to be seen. The scabious are still flowering. There's lots of heads of the small cat's ear scattered through the grassland. And there's lucerne, Medicago sativa, from every colour, from almost white to for all the shades of purple to really quite deep purple. And that was still flowering and providing food for insects on the trip. And we did see some insects. There was quite a few butterflies about. In fact, there's some skippers and painted ladies from memory, and it's a common blue male. I'm rushing through these so Steve can have a proper go. The terrestrial version of Amphibious bistort flowering very nicely. For the amphibious version, obviously you need ponds or canals, water, and the leaves spread out along the water surface, much broader than the terrestrial form, and all the flowers stick up above the water, and it makes a really quite pretty sight. But it's quite difficult getting non-botanists to believe that they're the same plant, but it is. We went through some quite dense areas of willow scrub with all sorts of find along there. And then we finished off at the south end in the dunes. This is where I left them, and they carried off looking at the more dune flora. So like Hightown, there's a wide range of habitats and a similarly wide range of plant species to find. The next one was the 18th of September. So we're getting into autumn here. This is one of the council planting beds, not far from Marks and Spencer's in Ormskirk. It's got a good patch of Vulpia, but the planting has died out here for some reason, and they've never replaced it. They chopped down the nice flowering hawthorn. So I'm sort of living in dread of them coming and redoing this, because it has a colony of over 20 green-flowered helleborines, which is a nationally scarce orchid species. Now, I took these slightly before the trip, but it's also called the pendulous flowered helleborine. You can see the capsules all hang down, and then you have these green flowers. Really, but there's quite a lot of them. There's another one there. There's some more there. Luckily, not all of them are in a bare bit. They're also within the surviving planting as well. So here it is amongst the box honeysuckle. There's two plants here. But this is a typical arrangement of leaves on this helleborine. They're all in two rows, that way, that way, that way, that way. They're not all, they don't make a whirl around the whole plant, like the whole stem, like broad-leaved helleborine would do, for example. So that was interesting to see. But to get here, we come from the train station, through the bus station, and the planters at the bus station were dominated by shaggy soldier. But I didn't get a shot of that. Perhaps Steve has. I find it difficult to take photographs when I'm bleeding. Yeah, this is a weed which is now common around the streets of Ormskirk, which we never used to see at all before. Water bent, Polypogon viridis, and this is a really good stand of it. And I presume this is happening in all sorts of other urban areas as well now, but it was quite exciting when I first saw it, but it's everywhere now. Again, another typical plant of urban areas, glittery of the wall, the Paritaria judicea, and that's still flowering in August. This is more of a local speciality. This is a hangover from the days when the arable land came this far into town. This is Stachys arvensis, the field woundwort, which is an annual woundwort. This is growing next to a vacant site near a busy road. There's the odd old wall still in town with some wall ferns. So there's maidenhair spleenwort, and there's the non-native ivy-leaved toadflax. And there's also walled rue here, sharing a crevice with the maidenhair spleenwort and the various mosses. Dig to the arable land just on the outskirts of Ormskirk, and this scarlet pimpernel with the odd-shaped petals was flowering just where we had our lunch. From there we headed south further into Alton. This is Christchurch, Alton, and this is cypress spurge, a big stand of a garden escape, an exotic spurge, Euphorbia cyparissius. And I didn't get a picture of it, but this is the garden, which I think must belong to a footballer or something. It's got two huge giraffes in it, made out of metal. Anybody who came will remember those. And then we returned back to Ormskirk through a little hill, Wimbrick Hill, which is an outbreak of sandstone, similar to what we saw at Burton. And we've got a little mini patch of heath with rowan and broom and heather and exposed bedrock. And again, we've got the early hairgrass, which likes these acidic situations. And we've got Hypnum jutlandicum, which is typical plant of heather heath. It typically forms a carpet under established heather, Caluna vulgaris. And for a bit of luck, we also found some white heather. And then final trip of the field meeting of the year was in October the 9th to Dibbonsdale, a lovely bit of ancient woodland on the Wirral. I went by train, got off at Spittal and walked through part of the woodland for the meeting place at the car park. There's wetland as well as woodland, and a damp, tall vegetation we're looking at. The meadowsweet had fully finished flowering, and the seed pods are fascinating to look at on many species, but especially so on meadowsweet. They form these little curls like those midget ice gems that you can get. So the brown ones are the riper ones, and as they unswirl, they shed the seeds out. But they're well worth looking at all stages of its development. Because the focus was on fungus, and Steve and Tony Carter were identifying many species. This, I think, is an ink cap growing on some dead wood, probably Mycasia. There's a earth ball of some sort. Not a very good picture. Oh, this is an interesting one. This is a drumstick fungus of some sort. What it is growing on? Is it growing on an insect pupa? I don't know. But we saw a wide range of stuff. Again, I say it's got the ancient woodland. It's really good in spring for spring flowers, and it's got water as well as the little river Dibben running through. It's got this pond. There's various ponds, and the anglers have been hoiking stuff out. And it was mainly rigid hornwort, Stratophyllum demersum, and you can see bits of duckweed caught in it strong. But it's quite a distinctive thing, isn't it? It must be great shelter for fish eggs and aquatic insects and all sorts. And it's the party looking for whatever they could find on the forest floor. This is the Hornbeam Grove. Beautiful big specimens of hornbeam. Some of which have got various fungal growth on them. This is one that I do sort of know. This is the turkey tail fungus, Tremetis versicolor. And another good late flowering plant is the ivy. And that was coming to flower, and that attracts loads of insects as well. And that's the end of mine.